The night everything changed. August 16th, 1977. The phone rang at 2:30 p.m. in Graceland's upstairs bedroom, but Elvis Presley didn't answer it. He was sitting on the edge of his king-size bed, staring at the prescription bottles lined up on his nightstand like soldiers awaiting orders. Outside, Memphis suffocated under the summer heat, but inside these walls, the air conditioning hummed a mechanical lullaby that did nothing to cool the fever burning in his mind. His hands trembled, not from fear, not from withdrawal, but from something deeper, something he couldn't name. The concert at the Market Square Arena in Indianapolis was scheduled for that night. 17,000 people had bought tickets. 17,000 strangers who thought they knew him, who thought they understood what it meant to be Elvis Presley. But how could they? How could anyone understand what it felt like to be trapped inside a legend while the man beneath it slowly suffocated? He stood up. The room spun for a moment, then steadied. His reflection in the full-length mirror caught his attention. A bloated stranger wearing his face, dressed in silk pajamas that cost more than most families made in a month. When had he become this? When had the kid from Tupelo, Mississippi, the one who just wanted to sing, disappeared into this grotesque caricature? The bathroom called to him. It always did. That's where he did his best thinking, where the world couldn't reach him, where he could be alone with the only person he trusted anymore, himself. But wait, let me take you back 6 months earlier. February 1977, the Sahara Tahoe Hotel, South Lake Tahoe, Nevada. Elvis had just finished a disastrous 2-week engagement. His weight had ballooned to 250 pounds. His voice cracked during Hurt. He forgot lyrics to songs he'd performed 1,000 times. The audience still cheered. They always cheered, but he could see it in their eyes. Pity, they pitied him. After the final show, his road manager, Joe Esposito, found him backstage, slumped in a chair, his jumpsuit unzipped halfway down his chest, sweat pooling in the folds of his neck. "Boss, we gotta talk about the schedule," Joe said, his voice careful, measured. "The tour's getting heavier. More cities, more shows. Maybe we should what?" Elvis interrupted, his voice sharp. "Cancel? Disappoint people? Let them down?" Joe's silence was answer enough. "I can handle it," Elvis said, though even he didn't believe the words. "I always handle it." But handling it meant more pills. Demerol for pain, Seconal for sleep, Dexedrine to wake up, Percodan to get through the day, Hycodone for his throat, Amital, Quaalude, Placidol, Valmid. The names blurred together like the days themselves. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick to those in the inner circle, provided them all, legally prescribed, medically necessary. That's what Nick always said. "These aren't street drugs, Elvis. This is medicine. This is what you need to function." And Elvis believed him, because what choice did he have? Now here's where it gets shocking. In March 1977, 3 books were published about Elvis. Not authorized biographies, exposés, tell-all memoirs from former bodyguards Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. The title, Elvis, What Happened? The content, brutal. They detailed his drug use, his erratic behavior, his violent mood swings, his obsession with guns, his deteriorating mental state. They painted a portrait of a man spiraling out of control, and they did it while he was still alive, still performing, still pretending everything was fine. Elvis didn't read the books. He couldn't. But he felt their weight, felt the betrayal like a physical thing lodged in his chest. These were men he'd trusted, men he'd employed for years, men he'd considered family. And they'd sold him out for what? A publishing advance? Their 15 minutes of fame? The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent his entire life creating an image, controlling the narrative, being who everyone needed him to be. Now these men were exposing the truth, and he had no defense because the truth was undeniable. "They're lying," he told his girlfriend, Ginger Alden, one night in April as they lay in bed, the television flickering in the darkness. "They're making things up to sell books." But Ginger didn't respond. She just stroked his hair and said nothing, and her silence told him everything. The pills helped. They always helped. They made the betrayal sting less, made the fear more manageable, made the impossible task of being Elvis Presley for one more day, one more hour, one more minute seem achievable. Without them, he couldn't sleep. Without them, his back pain, chronic since a 1973 fall on stage, became unbearable. Without them, the anxiety attacks came, sudden and vicious, leaving him gasping for air, convinced he was dying. Dr. Nick said it was all manageable, controlled, safe. But now, here's the detail you need to hear. In the 6 months leading up to August 16, 1977, Dr. Nick prescribed Elvis over 10,000 doses of various medications: amphetamines, barbiturates, narcotics, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, laxatives, hormones. The Graceland medicine cabinet looked like a pharmacy. Elvis's personal nurse, Tish Henley, administered the medications on a strict schedule, written out on index cards, timed to the minute. It was a system, a routine. And routines made Elvis feel safe. But systems break down. By summer 1977, Elvis wasn't sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours a night. His tour schedule was relentless. Cities bleeding into other cities, stages that all looked the same, hotel rooms with different views of the same American landscape. He was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, lonely in a way that crowds couldn't cure. His daughter Lisa Marie was 9 years old and living in Los Angeles with her mother, his ex-wife Priscilla. He saw her sometimes, but not enough, never enough. And when he did see her, he wondered what she thought of him now. This bloated, slow-moving man who bore little resemblance to the lean, electric performer of her early childhood. "Daddy, are you okay?" she'd asked him the last time she visited, in July. "I'm fine, baby," he'd said, forcing a smile. "Daddy's just tired." But he wasn't fine, and being tired didn't begin to cover it. The Indianapolis concert. Let me get back to that. Elvis never made it to Indianapolis. By 4 p.m. on August 16th, the calls started coming in from his management team. Where was he? Was he on the plane yet? The jet was fueled and ready at Memphis airport. The band was already in Indianapolis, setting up. The promoter was freaking out. Ticket holders were gathering outside the arena. Elvis Presley doesn't cancel shows. Elvis Presley always shows up, except this time he didn't. At 2:30 p.m., Elvis had told his girlfriend Ginger that he couldn't sleep. He was going to the bathroom to read for a while. He did this often, took a book, usually about spirituality or religion, and sat in his custom bathroom reading until the sleeping pills kicked in. Ginger went back to sleep. The house was quiet. The Memphis Mafia, his entourage of friends and bodyguards, were either asleep or out. Graceland, for once, was still. Hours passed. Around 2 p.m. on August 16th, 12 hours after Elvis had entered the bathroom, Ginger woke up and realized he wasn't in bed. She called out. No answer. She walked to the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Elvis was on the floor, face down, his arms tucked beneath him. He was wearing gold pajama bottoms. His skin had a bluish tint. His face was buried in the plush carpet. A book, a scientific search for the face of Jesus, lay near his head, its pages bent where it had fallen. Ginger screamed. Joe Esposito called the ambulance. Dr. Nick rushed to Graceland. They tried CPR. They tried everything. But Elvis was already gone. He'd been gone for hours. The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance anyway, going through the motions because he was Elvis Presley, and you don't give up on Elvis Presley, even when there's clearly nothing left to save. At Baptist Memorial Hospital, they tried to revive him for 30 minutes. Dr. Nick refused to give up, pumping his chest, breathing into his mouth, administering adrenaline directly into his heart. But there was no heartbeat to restart, no life to reclaim. At 3:30 p.m., Elvis Presley was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. The official cause, cardiac arrhythmia, heart attack, natural causes. But here's what they didn't say at first. The toxicology report, released months later, after intense pressure from journalists and investigators, told a different story. Elvis's blood contained significant levels of codeine, ethanamate, methaqualone, and unspecified barbiturates. His tissue samples showed evidence of 14 drugs in his system. The medical examiner's report suggested polypharmacy, the combined effects of multiple drugs as a contributing factor. But the official autopsy report, released by the Shelby County Medical Examiner, stuck with cardiac arrhythmia. The family wanted it that way. The Memphis establishment wanted it that way. The Elvis Presley legacy demanded it that way. Dr. Nick was never charged with a crime related to Elvis's death, though he later faced federal charges for overprescribing medications to multiple patients. He lost his medical license in 1995, but maintained until his death in 2016 that he'd done everything he could to help Elvis, that the drugs were medically necessary, that he tried to wean him off the dangerous combinations, but Elvis wouldn't cooperate. Maybe that's true. Maybe Dr. Nick was trying to help. Maybe the road to Elvis's bathroom floor was paved with good intentions and medical rationalizations, and the impossible task of keeping a man who didn't want to be kept alive functioning for just one more show, one more tour, one more year. But here's what haunts me about this story. Elvis Presley spent his entire adult life trying to please people. He gave audiences what they wanted: the voice, the moves, the charisma, the myth. He gave Colonel Parker, his manager, what he wanted: constant touring, constant money, constant control. He gave his entourage what they wanted: jobs, loyalty, a piece of the dream. He gave his ex-wife what she wanted: a divorce when she asked for it, even though it broke him. He gave his daughter what he could, given the limitations of his life and health. He gave Dr. Nick what he wanted: a patient who never questioned the prescriptions, who trusted blindly, who believed the pills were medicine and not slow poison. But what did Elvis want? I think he wanted to sleep, really sleep. Not the artificial unconsciousness of barbiturates, but genuine rest. The kind of rest where you close your eyes without anxiety clawing at your chest, without pain radiating through your body, without the weight of being Elvis Presley crushing you under its accumulated tonnage. I think he wanted to be seen, not as the legend, not as the brand, not as the myth, but as Vernon and Gladys Presley's son from Tupelo, who loved his mama, who loved gospel music, who wanted to make people happy but didn't know how to make himself happy in the process. I think he wanted someone, anyone, to tell him it was okay to stop, to say, "You've done enough, you've given enough, you can rest now." But no one said that. No one could say that, because too many people depended on Elvis Presley continuing to be Elvis Presley, no matter the cost. The funeral was held at Graceland on August 18, 1977. 50,000 people lined the streets of Memphis. Presidents sent condolences. Musicians mourned. Fans wept. The world stopped spinning for a moment to acknowledge that something irreplaceable had been lost. But here's the truth they didn't speak at the funeral. Elvis Presley didn't die on August 16, 1977. He died years earlier, incrementally, dose by dose, show by show, compromise by compromise. What happened in that bathroom was just his body finally catching up to a death that had been happening in slow motion for a long time. And maybe that's the most tragic part of this story. Not that he died young, not that he died alone on a bathroom floor, but that he died while still trying to be what everyone else needed him to be, still trying to fulfill obligations and maintain appearances and pretend that the pills were medicine and not suicide in installments. The Indianapolis concert never happened. Those 17,000 people got refunds. The tour was canceled. The machinery that had kept Elvis Presley moving forward, performing, existing in the public eye, that machinery ground to a halt. And in its silence, in the absence of the spectacle, what remained was just the truth. A man who couldn't find a way to live inside the legend he'd created, and so he stopped trying. I think about that last book he was reading, A Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus. Elvis was deeply religious, deeply spiritual, deeply consumed with questions about faith and meaning and what comes after this life. Maybe in those final hours alone in that bathroom, reading about someone who supposedly performed miracles and rose from the dead, he was looking for an answer, looking for hope, looking for evidence that suffering has a purpose, that sacrifice means something, that love, even when it's used up and exhausted and bled dry, still matters. Did he find an answer? I don't know. The book doesn't tell us. The autopsy doesn't tell us. The toxicology report doesn't tell us. But here's what I believe. Elvis Presley gave everything he had. He gave until there was nothing left to give. He gave until his body said no more, until his heart, literally and figuratively, couldn't sustain one more beat. And maybe that's both his tragedy and his triumph. Maybe that's what makes him legendary. Not the music, not the movies, not the jumpsuit or the sideburns or the thank you very much, but the fact that he never learned to say no, never learned to preserve himself, never learned that you can't pour from an empty cup, and so he poured until the cup shattered. On August 16, 1977, at approximately 2 p.m., Elvis Presley entered a bathroom in Graceland with a book about Jesus and never came out. What happened in those hours? We'll never know. But when they found him, face down on the carpet, the book splayed open beside him. I imagine that somewhere in those final moments, he finally got what he'd been searching for all along. Peace, rest, release. Not from drugs, not from fame, but from the impossible burden of being Elvis Presley. And maybe, just maybe, in that final silence, he found something else too. Something the pills could never provide, the crowds could never give, the Colonel could never package and sell. Something that had eluded him his entire adult life. Something he'd been chasing since that first day at Sun Records when he walked in as a nobody and walked out as a somebody. Permission to just be human. The king is dead. Long live the king, but forget the crown, forget the throne, forget the myth. Remember the man. Remember the cost. Remember that behind every legend is a human being who bleeds and hurts and struggles and dies, just like everyone else. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, but his story, the real story, not the sanitized version, not the Hollywood ending, his story lives on as a warning and a reminder. Fame is a drug. Success is a trap. And sometimes the price of being extraordinary is your very ordinary human life. That's all, folks. That's the story they don't tell you. That's the truth behind the sequins and the screaming fans and the cultural revolution. Elvis has left the building, and he's never coming back.